Dr. Russell Barkley, a prominent psychologist, said people with ADHD know what to do, but they can't do what they know. And he might be right. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, also known as the DSM-5, is the guide used by clinicians to diagnose mental health conditions, and it defines ADHD as a persistent pattern of inattention and/or hyperactive impulsivity that interferes with functioning and development, and is characterized by both or either inattention or hyperactivity and impulsivity. However, there's way more going on in the brains of ADHD folks than meets the eye. So today, I'm going to discuss what we know about ADHD, how we think it works, its symptoms, its stigma, as well as different types of treatment. So first, what is ADHD? What does it do to your brain? Well, basically, everyone to some extent has an ability to manage their brain and tell it what to do. But this ability is impaired in ADHD. And that means that people with ADHD have a way harder time forcing their brain to focus on really anything that doesn't make your brain feel good, like video games, for example. Think about it like this. Your intention is to get your homework in on time, but your ADHD is like Mike Tyson and he's really excited about knocking you out, only instead of with punches, it's with funny dog memes from Reddit. And ADHD also prevents some of the systems that keep your brain from doing things on impulse, like planning and sticking to plans, regulating emotions, and adjusting your brain so that it's active at the times when it needs to be active and still at the time when it needs to be still. So what part of the brain does it affect? So we understand what ADHD does, but how does it actually do the thing that allows you to lose your car keys when they're still actually in your hand? Seriously, this has happened like 3 times to me this week and I still can't find my car keys. Or my wife. Where's my dog? ADHD was the first disorder that was found to be the result of a deficiency of a specific neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. And because of that norepinephrine deficiency, it affects 4 different parts of the brain. The first is the frontal cortex, which controls attention, executive function, and organization. Some schools of thought suggest that ADHD might stem from a lack of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex region of the brain. As a neurotransmitter, norepinephrine is linked to dopamine, which means that it messes with what we want to do versus what the fun-seeking pleasure centers of our brain want to do. And dopamine is a chemical that transmits signals between nerve cells in the brain. Dopamine is also believed to affect thought process, including memory and attention. I was thinking really hard of a cool pun to use here. No, wait, cool isn't the right word. Dopamine. The limbic system of the brain is also affected by ADHD and helps to regulate our emotions and attention. The basal ganglia, which ADHD affects by causing interbrain communication and information to short circuit, results in inattention and impulsivity. Basal ganglia also sounds like the name of some English supervillain in a spaghetti western. And finally, the reticular activating system. Now, the reticular activating system is like the central switchboard of the brain, and ADHD can cause inattention there as well as impulsivity. Try saying reticular activating system 5 times fast. I did. Failed miserably. So all of this is to say that many researchers in the field of ADHD don't consider it necessarily an attention deficit as it is an intention deficit, meaning that ADHD people can be highly intelligent and extremely well versed in a given number of subjects, but they don't have the ability to do anything with that information because our intention is subverted by ADHD. So let's dive into the symptoms of ADHD. ADHD manifests itself in physical symptoms such as hyperactivity and impulsivity, which leads to physical manifestations such as restlessness, talking excessively. I wonder if deaf people with ADHD sign super fast. Interruptions of others like butting into conversations, games, or activities. I am so deeply sorry for every time I do this and I have such regret after the fact. Psychological symptoms of ADHD are inattention, such as overlooking or missing details, inaccurate work. I was once fired after 3 days from a data entry job because I couldn't consistently enter data. I also have a 4.0 GPA. This proves that learning is more fun than data entry. Difficulty in listening. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I was pondering what if Arthur Schopenhauer and Simone de Beauvoir connected on Tinder. Awkward. Problems with organization. They're easily sidetracked. Cat memes. And they have avoidance and reluctance to engage in mental tasks such as schoolwork, reports, forms, and lengthy papers. There's also issues with object permanence. Yeah, I found my keys, but now I've lost my car. And ADHD folks are more readily subjected to distraction by extraneous stimuli. Cat memes. There are a few behavioral disorders that sometimes go along with ADHD, like oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD, which consists of a pattern of angry or irritable moods, defiant behavior, and vindictiveness lasting more than 6 months. And ODD folks have problems with authority figures, often blaming others for their own mistakes or behaviors. And ADHD is often comorbid with oppositional defiant disorder, sooner, meaning if you have ADHD, you might also have symptoms of ODD, and this personally was amazing to learn about because I have definitely encountered this in my life, and understanding it as an impulse and a disorder has really shed some light on how to circumvent this frustrating part of my psychological makeup. Also, are impulses like instincts? Are they related? What is that? Depression is also comorbid with ADHD, and I think that the author Ruby Walker summed up the experience of depression with ADHD best when she said, quote, "The people who have never dealt with it will never understand how legitimately triumphant it feels to decide to take a shower and then actually do it." This gives me all the feels. It also just reminded me I need to shower. So obviously ADHD can interact with other mental states, but how many people out there actually have ADHD? So population surveys suggest that ADHD occurs in most cultures in about 5% of children and about 2.5% of adults. This means that millions of US children have been diagnosed with ADHD. Boys are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls, but this doesn't mean that girls don't have ADHD. They do. It just currently appears to be more diagnosed in boys. And I should also note there may be a stigma against diagnosing girls with ADHD as opposed to boys. Patriarchal cultures are not good for mental health. Pass it on. Based on diagnostic interview data, the overall prevalence of current adult ADHD is 4.4%, and it's higher for males versus females. Also, non-Hispanic whites had a higher prevalence than all other race and ethnicity groups. And the lifetime estimate prevalence of ADHD in the US is 8.1%. What's more is that we honestly don't have enough data to know how this even affects LGBTQ folks. According to a single-center study that compared with normally developing children, young people with a diagnosis of ADHD had more than 6 times the odds of communicating gender variance. So ADHD might have a link to gender variance or possibly even gender dysphoria, but studies are still inconclusive. It should also be mentioned that especially in trans folks, mental health is used as a stigma to discriminate. So many more may have a mental health issue and not even know it or get treatment. There are a plethora of treatments available for ADHD, including medications. However, sometimes meds aren't even necessary. For children with ADHD younger than 6 years of age, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends parent training in behavior management as the first line of treatment before medication is tried. For children 6 years of age and older, the recommendations include medication and behavior therapy together, and parent training in behavior management for children up to age 12, as well as other types of behavior therapy and training for adolescents. Several different types of medications are FDA approved to treat ADHD in children as young as age 6. Stimulants such as Adderall, Concerta, and Ritalin are the best known and most widely used ADHD medications. Between 70 to 80% of children with ADHD have fewer ADHD symptoms when taking these fast-acting medications. Non-stimulants were approved for the treatment of ADHD in 2003. They do not work quite as quickly as stimulants, but the effect can last for up to 24 hours. And medications can affect children differently and can have side effects such as decreased appetite or sleep problems. And one child may respond well to one medication, but not to another. And while there are many ways that people like to treat ADHD, many people also turn to cannabis. And marijuana is sometimes prescribed as a treatment for individuals with attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Dr. Jack McHugh, a professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, says that most cannabis appears to be, quote, most helpful for hyperactivity and impulsivity. It may be less helpful for inattentiveness. So one of the most important things for the ADHD brain is to help itself with the problem of external memory. And this is why many therapists recommend weekly planners, journals, alarms, and timers to help keep ADHD brains on track. Now, this support system can offer amazing benefits. Now, it's easy to feel overwhelmed when your brain wants to react to every piece of stimuli it encounters, but there are ways you can get help. Or honestly, if you personally don't have ADHD, just understanding the symptoms and empathizing with the difficulty of having ADHD can be really valuable to your ADHD friends and family. So today we learned about ADHD, what parts of the brain it affects, and how it works or doesn't, and the prevalence of diversity of individuals it affects. We also learned about what treatments are available, as well as how things like journaling and using a planner can often help with ADHD. I honestly learned a lot from doing the research for this project. I learned about how ADHD can and does affect my personal relationship and goals, and that ADHD brains are also amazingly creative and able to deal with adversity even with their limitations. Many rise above the stigma, difficulty, and anxiety that comes with ADHD, and I hope you can as well. Where's my wife? Where's my keys? Where's my dog?